Hi everybody, Nutnfancy here with my son down the road there, last suspect. We have brought you to a location that has a very sobering story attached to it, and this is the exact location where it happened. We've traveled to Provo, Utah. We're in beautiful Provo Canyon in the winter time, and this was a site where I learned a lot of life lessons and had some reinforced to me. This will be the companion video to my level 2 first aid kit review, and it's going to have to be a separate video because there's a lot of philosophy and maybe some lessons I can impart to my subscribers. Where we are is on the now current 4-lane highway leading up Provo Canyon. But back in the 1980s, this was not a 4-lane highway. It was nothing more than a 2-lane highway. Eventually, because of a very dangerous blind corner where last suspect is just prior to this corner here, it was a blind corner where you could not see your way around it in the 2-lane highway, and it was a scene of many accidents. And what they did is actually bored through the mountain there and created the 4-lane highway and the tunnel system you see now. Now, many years ago in my youth, when I was a teenager, I worked up at Sundance Ski Resort. I started out as a parking lot attendant and worked my way up into the lifts and became a lift operator. Love that job. When I was a parking lot attendant, though, it often required that I would go up early in the morning and go do my work. And that would mean like 5 in the morning, maybe even earlier some days, just depending how the snow fell. I'd have to come up to Provo Canyon and then up to Sundance Canyon and do my job. It was just such a day in the mid-1980s, early 1980s, when I came up this 2-lane highway, and it was a rainy, cloudy day on a Sunday morning. I had an old beat-up Volkswagen Bug that I was driving up the canyon, and as I approached this area up here, I noticed a bunch of cars were parked, and the road was pretty much blocked off with all the vehicles that were stopped. And a snowy sleet was falling, kind of rain turning into snow. And I pulled over to the side. It's over on there on the side of the road. Now changed because of, again, the realignment of the road system here. But I pulled the car over, and there were a bunch of people milling around. Right prior to this corner, there were probably about 25 people. A lot of them were my fellow employees up at Sundance. I got out of the car, and it's like, what's up? Some of my coworkers told me there had been a really bad accident right around the corner, which I just showed you, and directly behind me. I'll show you it here in just a second. And they said some people are dead, we suspect, and there's a lot of blood and there's a lot of guts. And I was like, okay, is anybody helping him? And everyone just stood there. I'm talking to this large group of people. They all just stood there staring at me like, we don't know what to do. We're waiting for help. Remember, back in the 80s, we didn't have cell phones. And so the nearest help would probably be 35 to 45 minutes away at the location I'm at. I said, what's going on? Is anyone out there helping? And, most of them, a couple of them finally gathered enough wits to answer me. They're like, no, I don't think so. I shook my head in disbelief. I couldn't believe it. I was like, there's people dying around the corner, and you guys are sitting here milling around doing nothing. Unbelievable. Even at that young age, I had a first aid kit with me. Now, it's not the level of first aid kit that I carry now, especially in remote areas or an area where I think I might need it. But I had something. It was probably analogous to what you've seen as my level 1 kit, maybe a little bit more. I had a blanket and I had a pillow. So I booked it to my Volkswagen Beetle that I had parked behind the camera there, grabbed it, and I went trucking around the corner behind me. I didn't know what I was going to find. I don't know. Call me crazy, but I was not going to sit there milling around while people were dying. Keep in mind, there was no ambulance nearby. Someone had driven to go get help because there's no cell phones back then, in the early 1980s. I'm going to go show you exactly what I found as we round this corner. I'll describe the scene of the accident here in just a second, but first I want to back up and kind of describe a dynamic of an emergency situation that might help you in the future. It might help you mentally prepare for it. As I grabbed my first aid kit out of my Volkswagen Bug and I went booking it to the accident site, I turned around and I thought for sure that I would have at least 2, 3, maybe 5 guys following me, my fellow employees. And I knew they were fellow employees because they had the Sundance jacket on. I turned around and there was no one. I was all alone. Everybody in that group, prior to the blind corner on the side of the road, was standing there, and nobody followed me. Now, I don't want to make myself out to be some hero, because I'm not. But one thing I cannot personally abide is watching human suffering when I might be able to help and might be able to minimize that suffering. Even back then I felt that way, and I haven't changed. As maybe poorly equipped as I was back then with my basic first aid kit, my blanket, my pillow, I wanted to help. I wanted to help those people who were suffering around the country, in that accident. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know them. But I would want someone to do that for me, for my loved ones, my family, my friends, and just as a human family, we should do that for each other. To me, that strikes to the heart of what I call, and what a lot of people call, the sheepdog concept. And that is taking care of your fellow man. So yeah, I was shocked. I was shocked that no one was willing to come with me to help these people who were dying and bleeding. But that's exactly what I had to cope with. But I just pressed on. As I ran down the road and I got over that, I was like, okay, I guess I'm all alone here. The first thing that hit me on the accident scene was the smell. If you haven't been on or been around a major accident where body parts are getting chopped up, people are getting hurt, and I hate to be so graphic, but I have to portray what I saw and what happened and what transpired. But if you haven't been around that, it is unpleasant, to say the least. It is a very overpowering smell, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. But I pressed on. I'm going to take you to the exact scene where that accident happened, and I'll describe where everybody was. But for you to understand the mechanics of how it happened, I'm going to show you some model cars, like Matchbox variety, to describe the accident. And I'll do that now. Coming up the canyon was a semi-tractor trailer. He was, of course, on the right side of the road. Coming down the canyon was a family of 6, mom, dad, 4 children, in an International Harvester. I think it was called a Scout back then. It was kind of like an SUV, and that's what I'm going to refer to it as an SUV. To the best of my knowledge, the way the accident happened, and it was the fault of both drivers, the semi-tractor trailer driver swung a little tight on the blind corner, which is represented by this line right here. The International Scout swung a little bit wide. And remember, the weather was pretty bad that day, with a fair amount of rain, sleet coming down, turning into snow later. This is what happened. They caught each other halfway on each other's grill. The SUV was ejected against the mountainside, and with it was ejected the mother, who was not wearing a seatbelt. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, nobody in the vehicle was wearing a seatbelt, which was common back in the 1980s. Thank heavens we've gotten past that. The semi-tractor trailer driver, after impact, steered his rig hard right and actually departed the road surface and went over Provo River, and the river was flowing under his rig. With the back of his rig on the road, the semi-tractor trailer portion on the opposite side of the bank, the water flowing underneath. 2 of the children in the SUV were also ejected with the mother. The father stayed in the vehicle, and he was caught underneath the rib cage by the steering wheel. The other 2 children stayed in the back of the vehicle. Let's go look at the actual location. This is the actual hillside where the SUV was impacted. In fact, it was thrown up like that against this hill. And this is where the bodies were strewn. When the mother was ejected from the SUV, she was decapitated. And she was lying right about here with no head, and her head was close by. Again, I hate to be so graphic, guys, but I have to describe the scene. The little boy, 8 years old, was also ejected. He was laying pretty close to his mom, and he was bleeding profusely from his head. When he was ejected, a boulder, or not a boulder, but a rock penetrated his forehead, and there was blood coming out profusely, and actually there were several rocks embedded into his head. He had major trauma to his head area, bleeding bad. The two children in the back of the vehicle were banged up pretty bad, but they were actually the best off because they weren't ejected. The dad was coughing up blood, and he had taken that steering wheel again in the lower rib cage area, and he wasn't doing good as well. He was pretty much out of it and non-functioning. I couldn't discern on him any bleeding wounds, though. The kids in the back did have some bleeding things going on, and I wanted to treat all of them. To his credit, the truck driver actually got out of his rig, climbed on top of it, which was again stretched across this river right here. This is Provo River, and this is exactly where it was. There's a lot of snow here, so it's hard for me to access it without just plowing it. But the rig was stretched across the river there with the nose of his rig buried into that bank. And he climbed out on the top, walked over, and was assisting the victims of the accident. And he was uninjured. Now, I wasn't entirely correct in saying that nobody came to help, because some people did. It was a truck driver, and actually my girlfriend at the time. She was already on scene. She was not with a group of people, and I knew I liked her for a reason. And she was there helping everybody out. And I thought that was ultra cool. But it was just us three handling everything. Our first concern was to cover the mom up, because the kids in the back, they were in shock, but we didn't want them to see the mom. So we covered the mom up with a blanket. After that, our attention turned to the little boy, the 8-year-old, who had hit his head on the road surface and was bleeding so bad. I put my pillow that I had with me under him, and within about 30 seconds, it was completely soaked with blood. I honestly thought we were going to lose that little boy. That there's no way in the world I was going to be able to stop his bleeding to the stage where he would survive. And that gets, again, to my level 2 kit philosophy, and my own personal experience is you better have something that you can stop bleeding with. And you better be prepared for it, because that is pretty much what you're going to be faced with, and someone can bleed out and die very, very quickly. The dad we didn't do much with because he wasn't bleeding. I think it was mostly internal injuries, we learned later. And the two kids we treated, and I bandaged them up. One of them had a real severe laceration on his arm, and we took care of that as well. My girlfriend was helping, and she was a trooper, and we both assisted the little boy. I ran back to the group, who was still standing in shock around the corner, and asked, this is when I actually found out that if anyone had sent for help. And I really didn't get a definitive answer. I was like, did anyone send for help? And someone said, well, I think someone sent or drove down the canyon to go get help, to go get to a phone. And I was like, okay, well, that's not a good enough answer. Now, at most ski resorts, if you guys are skiers or snowers, snow sport guys, you'll know that most resorts have ski patrol guys. And I had some buddies up at Sundance Ski Resort that I knew were a lot more equipped than me and my girlfriend were to handle the emergency that are these severe wounds that we had down here. So I told her, I was like, hey, I'm going to take your car. And her car was actually parked up the road further than mine. And I said, I'm going to take your car and go up to the resort and bring these guys down. They're probably going to beat the paramedics big time. And that's what I did. Long story short, she had these onion skin tires on her vehicle. I almost went off the road like 30 times. So it was turning into snow by this time. But I got up to the resort and got one of the ski patrol guys. And I told him, I was like, dude, there is a bad accident down there at the mouth of the canyon, and people are dying. We need your help now. And without any hesitation, he's like, rock and roll, let's go. He grabbed his trauma kit, which I call a level 3. Level 3 kit being the type that paramedics use. They're trained to use it. They can do all kinds of advanced medical, well, not advanced, but life support type activities that I can't. And so we drove down, and once we got down here, the kid was still alive. And then at that point, someone better than myself was on scene, and with a better kit, better capabilities than I had to save lives. And now this location is no longer the thoroughfare to the canyon. It is an area where trout fishermen will park and access the river. I can pretty much guarantee you none of them know the history of this location and about how that pretty lady that day died after being ejected from her vehicle. As you may have gathered, this was a pretty pivotal event in my life, in the life of Nutnfancy. And it reinforced a lot of lessons to me, and it taught me a few new ones too, even as a teenager back then. I'll go over a few of those right now. The first lesson I've kind of already touched on, and that is, don't expect people to help you. You might be the only one that will respond in an emergency situation, especially if there's gore involved, people bleeding, arms, legs cut off, you name it. They may be shocked into inaction, just like the group of those individuals were that day. You know, there was just a few of us that were willing and able to help. It doesn't make us better, it's just that we were able to cope with what was going on that day. You know, a lot of people, for whatever reason, are not equipped to cope with it. They're not mentally prepared to deal with the sight of death and a lot of blood. And they're good people, but they will just basically do nothing. It doesn't mean they're bad people, it just means they're not equipped. And you know what, to be honest, I don't like blood and guts either. I hate it. But one thing I can't abide is the suffering of people, while maybe, just maybe, I am able to help them. So that kind of overrides my disdain for blood and guts, if you ask me. So that's lesson one. You may be the only one responding. Dude, get used to it. And I guess that's just the way it is sometimes. Secondly, be prepared. You know, as I came upon this scene that day, I felt pretty inadequate. You know, as I was treating that little boy, actually two little boys who were ejected, one was badly hurt, the other one only had actually minor injuries. I was really wishing I had a better first aid kit. And my girlfriend and I, we honestly thought we were going to watch that little boy die right in front of us as he bled out. And he also had a really bad injury on the back of his head. Skull was crushed. A level 2 kit, it makes a lot of sense in a lot of different situations. I also say if you go remote, and to me remote is anything where emergency response crews can't be there within maximum half an hour, preferably 15 minutes. If I go into any situation like that, I'm going to have at least a level 2 kit with me, if my weight and system can take it, and I recommend you do too. Because just one day you may come across an accident like this and you'll go, okay, not cool, but I'm ready for it. And you won't be like me that day saying, man, I wish my first aid kit was better. Mine sucks. It's not a good feeling. You don't want to see people die in front of you when you can stop it. Thirdly, kind of prepare for that blood and guts. And that's kind of hard to say how. I would say just mentally. Just be prepared mentally that, hey, this is something I'm going to have to get past, and in order to help these people, and that's the way it is. And I'll tell you, I don't like it. I don't like blood and guts. I don't dig it. I don't like being around it. But if I have to, I will deal with it, and I have. That's life. You'll have to do that. And secondly, I learned a lot from my girlfriend that day, and I was impressed how she was able to be one of those people that rounded the corner and started getting it done when people were dying and bleeding and all kinds of gore. I respected that. And no, I didn't end up marrying her. But Nutnfancy, or Mrs. Nutnfancy, has a lot of those same qualities. And so do a lot of my friends. is I want people that can act in emergencies. Not just for me, what if I get injured? I want them to be able to help me, but I just respect that. I respect the sheepdog mentality where people are willing to help other people when it's tough to do. And it will be tough to do, and it may be you that's going to save lives next time. Don't kid yourself. Especially if we go into WROL without rule of law, you'll see probably a lot more of this type of thing, and you may be the only one to render assistance. Serious story, serious life lesson. Oh, I know you guys are asking, well, how do they turn out? Real quick, of course, the mom died. She was ejected from the vehicle, died as soon as she did, obviously. The dad recovered from internal injuries. The little boys, the ones that were ejected, one got a plate in his head. He recovered 100%. And he's the one that had the rocks in his head. His brother, also injured, wasn't injured as bad. We treated his lacerations, and we were able to stop the bleeding on him pretty quickly. And he recovered 100%. And then the two kids in the back also recovered 100%. So in reality, with what happened that day, they were lucky they only lost one person, with none wearing seatbelts. So still a sad story. But a lot of times that's what life deals us. This is Nutnfancy signing off from Utah this time, after traveling down and over to Provo Canyon to recreate this story with you and share maybe just a little bit of philosophy on helping people and being prepared to do so. It's a sheepdog mentality, that's for sure. Signing off, over and out.